Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Law of One Spiritual Advice Podcast. My name is Elle, and I'm back again to read some Law of One material to you and share my opinions and reflections upon the contents of said quotes. So today's quotes are going to be mostly about, scary word, cancer. So although I just want to sort of give a little warning that I don't particularly like this quote in the way that when you listen to it or read it for the first time or whatever, it kind of holds some fear with it. So with that, I just want to say beforehand that I don't read this just so I can be like, haha, you don't do this, you'll get cancer, because that's sort of the way that your intellect and your mind will sort of read it. I more so would just remind you to take it all with a grain of salt, use your discernment, and just remember that whenever we're speaking in generalities, there's always the possibility that we could be wrong, because when we speak in generalities, it doesn't necessarily take into account the uniqueness of every part of creation, where we speak so that we can have understanding, but we always keep in mind that there are going to be exceptions to the rule. So let's go into this quote. So this quote is from session 46.16 and also 46.9. I just have two kind of sections put together just to maximize the understanding. All right, so the questioner asks, quote, "What is the plan for the use of the catalyst of cancer?" Ra answers, quote, "I am Ra. The catalyst and all catalyst is designed to offer experience. This experience in your density may be loved and accepted, or it may be controlled. These are the two paths. When neither path is chosen, the catalyst fails in its design, and the entity proceeds until catalyst strikes it, which causes it to form a bias towards acceptance and love, or separation and control. There is no lack of space-time in which this catalyst may work." Okay, and then I just want to add in from session 46.9, at the end of this long answer that they give, they also include, quote, "Control is the key to negatively polarized use of catalyst. Acceptance is the key to positively polarized use of catalyst. Between these two polarities lies the potential for this random and undirected energy creating a bodily complex analog of what you may call the cancerous growth of tissue." End of quote. Ra, section 46.9 and 46.16. Okay, so let's just lay the groundwork quickly in case, just to maximize understanding here, in case somebody happens to be listening to this sort of information for the first time. So there are polarities, which is we are in the third density. This is the density of choice, where we have an individuated consciousness, a sense of I, and with that sense of I, we then choose to make the choice, which is the choice to either serve others or to serve the self. And when I say serve the self, I would say serve the self exclusively, because you choose to serve yourself at the expense of all others, as opposed to the service to others path, which sees all others as part of one with that person. You're part of unity, and therefore you can serve others and the self. And there is sort of a solving of the paradox in that there is no differentiation necessarily between self and other self. Okay? So there is your groundwork. So polarities, when we say that is either serving the self or serving others. So that's basically the choice that you've made in life. Are you going to serve yourself exclusively, or are you going to walk the path of unity and, both serve yourself and others simultaneously? So then what happens is, in our path of seeking, we have catalyst that comes our way. Catalyst would just be considered experience. It's just your everyday things that happen to you. So you can consider experience catalyst, and that experience that happens to you is fairly random in that it just happens to everybody, no matter what path you're on. However, that experience is offered in hopes that it pushes you towards one of the paths of either acceptance or control, either service to others or service to self. So it sort of pushes you along until you decide to make one of those decisions. And you then either accept the catalyst, work with it as you will, or the catalyst, if you're on the service to self path, you would control and maximize the experience to get the most out of it specifically to benefit the self. Okay, and then also when I'm talking about service to self, I'm obviously not talking about this so that we can teach service to self entities how to serve themselves. It's just more just so you have a wider perception of things. You can understand the service to others path a little bit better. I would assume that that is why you're listening to these sort of things. Okay, so catalyst strikes me, and then what do I mean by control or acceptance? It's pretty open to interpretation concept. So basically in the same sort of section, in section 46.10 and 46.9, the questioner asks Ra about a specific example, which would be anger. So let's talk about that. So if you were on the service to self path, then how would you control that anger? Or if you were on the service to others path, how would you work with that anger to accept it? Okay, so let's just read these to give you the full range of understanding. So section 46.10, questioner, quote, then, as I understand it, you are saying that if the positively polarizing entity fails to accept the other self, or if the negatively polarizing entity fails to control the other self, either of these conditions will cause cancer possibly. Is this correct? Ra answers, quote, I am Ra. This is partially correct. The first acceptance or control, depending on polarity, is of the self. Anger is one of the many things to be accepted and loved as part of the self or controlled as part of the self if the entity is to do work. And then in section 46.9, we kind of continue on with this example. They have them in reverse order because that's just the way the raw material is. Sometimes the questioner questions things and the answers come later and they might not be in the correct order. So 46.9 is this example on anger continues. So Ra is indicating here, quote, the entity polarizing positively perceives the anger. This entity, if using this catalyst, mentally blesses and loves this anger in itself. It then intensifies this anger consciously in mind alone until the folly of this red ray energy is perceived, not as folly in itself, but as energy subject to spiritual entropy due to the randomness of energy being used. Positive orientation then provides the will and the faith to continue this mentally intense experience of letting the anger be understood, accepted, and integrated with the mind-body-spirit complex. The other self, which is the object of anger, is thus transformed into an object of acceptance, understanding, and accommodation, all being reintegrated using the great energy which anger began. Okay, so now this is me speaking again, end of quote for now. So that is the positive orientation, so the service to others orientation. That's how you work with anger. You can see it's not very clear. You basically just have to work with it, right? It's probably going to take some time to work with it versus what the negative entity, the service to self entity would do, which is they're going to control this anger and express it in a way that maximizes their service to self and the fact that they are in control of the situation and in control of others. So now Ra continues with this quote. Continued quote, the negatively oriented mind-body-spirit complex will use this anger in a similarly conscious fashion, refusing to accept the undirected or random energy of anger, and instead, through will and faith, funneling this energy into a practical means of venting the negative aspect of this emotion so as to obtain control over other self or otherwise control the situation causing anger. Okay, so the end of quote. So this is me speaking again. So you can see that to put in more human-like terms, somebody does something to a negatively oriented entity, they will seek revenge. They will get revenge in the most perfect way that basically puts you under their control or at least puts them within the possibility of maximizing their catalyst to serve themselves the best way that they can, which is to control that catalyst. So now just to finish off that quote, which I already read this, but it is the end of this quote. So continued on, quote, Ra, control is the key to negatively polarized use of catalyst. Acceptance is the key to positively polarized use of catalyst. Between these polarities lies the potential for this random and undirected energy creating a bodily complex analog of what you would call cancer with growths of tissue. End of quote. So that brings me to the thought of, well, how long do you have to work with something before it becomes cancerous? Well, that is a good question. I do not know. I would imagine that is unique to everybody and unique to their path and their sort of incarnational lessons. But I the way I explain it to people is basically that like a lesson and the catalyst and experience will come to you again and again and again. It's sort of like a spiral. You can think of it as a circle, but it's like an upward circling spiral because you are at a new perception level every time you come back to this catalyst. But what happens is if you work with your catalyst, meaning you sort of contemplate, you meditate, you think about the things that are happening to you in relation to lessons of love. How are these things happening to you, and why are they happening to you? What can you learn from it? What can you learn that maximizes your perception of service, and you're able to maybe serve others, just to come into a cleaner, more pure perception of unity? How can you use that catalyst? How can you find the love in the moment? All those types of things are how you would sort of want, how the service to others person would walk that path. And when you fail to accept those things and you fail to notice these lessons, and instead you just sort of keep living life every day and you're not contemplating, you're not working on yourself, then I would think what sort of happens is that the catalyst just constantly getting thrown at you and it's just rattling within your brain. So eventually the mind says, you know what, this person isn't getting this, or your higher self, your mind, whatever, it's saying, your unconscious self, right? It's kind of like, look, this conscious version of me is not going to get this. They're not understanding the lesson that is being offered to them. Unfortunately, we're now going to have to manifest this lesson within their body so it becomes unignorable. And I honestly think that is how this works. It's like basically you have quite a few opportunities to work with it. And, by the time the cancer comes or some sort of bodily distortion comes your way, like I think that this applies to all sort of bodily issues because of the way the chakras and things work, and the body is a creature of the mind. If you do not work with the catalyst, it's offered to the body. And I say offered to the body because it's not like it's a punishment. And although your mind probably would see it that way as a punishment, it's not that. It's offered to the body. It's essentially like, look, you need to learn this lesson. You've decided when you came here before incarnation or whatever it was, that this is some lessons that you needed to learn. The Creator is very patient. You probably had a lot of time to learn that lesson. And if you did not, then, here you go. Here's your opportunity. So now, do you now want to then control that outcome, or are you going to learn the lesson and try to accept it and work with it and let go? Which brings me to the finer points of what I kind of really wanted to talk about, which is controlling the outcome, expectations of the outcome, and surrendering to flow. So as you try to control the outcomes, when you're serving or doing anything really, you're trying to control. So I know that you want to do well, right? And you want to do well, so you want to control the things so they turn out the best possible way. And it's not that you can't necessarily do that. That's okay. You want to set everything up the best way you can to sort of maximize success in your service or in your growth or whatever it is. But you do have to have a certain level of detachment from the outcome, in that you do not know the plan of the Creator. You do not know the free will and the plan of other selves. So although you may have an expectation to serve somebody, you may do that and the outcome for the other person may not be good or what you expected, but maybe that wasn't the lesson in what was happening in that dynamic. Maybe the lesson in that dynamic was actually for you in a way that you can learn how to give freely, have somebody, spit in your face over your service, and then you can learn to say, to not give up, to continue on, to say, you know what, that's okay. I have good intentions. I'm going to keep doing well. So there's always this possibility of you controlling it or surrendering to the flow. And I would think, a little bit of balance is good. It's like you're using your intellect to line things up. It's sort of control, but I wouldn't really call that a control, as long as you're sort of letting go the expectation of the outcome. It's even okay to have a good goal of your expectation of the outcome, but just not being upset when maybe things don't turn out the way that you foresaw them to, which is sort of gonna happen to you no matter what. So I find that in this density, it's a confusing place. It's the place of choice, the place to be confused, because to have choice, we must be confused. So in that confusion, it's a great resource to just learn to surrender to the flow. This is little you, the big higher self, the creator. Apparently they've got this lined up, so we're just here to do our best. You don't have to be so anxious about every single outcome, thinking, oh, I need to accept this, or I'm going to get cancer, or, oh, I need to serve in the most maximum way. In other parts of raw material, they talk about 51% service to others. So many things to be anxious about. Am I going to make the cut? All these things to worry about and to control and try to make sure that you're doing good and you're on the right side of things. But I mean, that is sort of folly in that it's a controlling thing. You'll learn that the more you try to control, the more it seems like a shortcut, but it honestly will just take you down a path that takes longer. When you are learning to accept things as they are, it is your resistance to what is that causes your suffering. I believe that's a quote from Buddha or something. The more that you just realize that and surrender to the flow, do the best that you can, detach from the outcome, I believe that the more peace you will bring into your life, the more that the anxiety might calm down, because it's easy to worry about outcomes. And especially if you're a do-gooder, you're high in agreeableness, you want to do good for people, you want to impress them, you want to serve them in the best possible way, you're going to have that want or that temptation to control. And so just know that the dynamic exists, and you can have a sort of a bit of control, but for the most part you're sort of surrendering and just living in this moment and just doing the best that you can with the resources that are in front of you. Now I'll give you a tiny little example, because synchronistically I was sitting here the other day and sort of reading these quotes and even telling my partner about, needing to surrender to the flow more. And they were watching on Netflix a documentary, I think it was. I wrote it down so I wasn't completely leaving you in the dark. It's called The River Runner. So it's just a video on a guy who's a kayaker. And then I just wanted to show you this example because he explained it in like exactly the way that I'm sort of explaining it, but I'll just give you a background and I'll try to be a little quick here. So he is a kayaker. He's just sort of doing his thing. He was always sort of angry. He lost some friends in the river kayaking, things like this. It sort of made him bitter and angry. And he was always trying to control the situation, and I would suggest he was probably trying to control things through his anger, right? Getting stuck in the lower chakra, in the red ray chakra and the orange ray, just sort of getting stuck down there too often. So he noted that he was trying to control things. What happened was he had to go for an MRI for some reason. He bumped his head, and they found actually a brain tumor in his head. So he then had sort of the choice to like go down like chemo route or other route, and in his sort of anger he said, screw this, I'm going kayaking, and he went off and did his thing, which I'm not suggesting is a control or acceptance. It was just sort of what he was doing at first. He was still sort of trying to control things, but then he did this sort of big river run where it really pushed them to the extremes of what they can do. And it really just, I believe what was happening was he was realizing that he's at the forces of nature, running down these big rivers, right? Even when you are really prepared, you can still get caught somewhere, and somebody who's extremely advanced can just be gone like that. So losing people over and over and sort of being subject to the fact that you might have a brain tumor and you're going to die and there's really nothing you can do about it. That allowed him to, over like the next year or two, even though he negated, getting care for his sort of head tumor in the way that the medical community might suggest, he learned to let go. And he did these river runs, and essentially he explained at the very end of it that it was literally his ability to surrender to the flow of the moment, to let go of his anger and his expectations and his trying to controlling of the moment, which led him to a place of peace and within himself. And what do you know? He, a couple of years later, was going back to the doctor, got his, I think they're called MRI, and he was expecting to get a call to tell him how much his head tumor had grown, which would obviously be a problem, because the more it grows, the more problem that there's going to arise from it. And the doctor says, hey, you know what? It hasn't grown one bit. It is actually just stopped, it seems. So obviously subjective, and use your discernment, of course, but it was just a good example for what I know to be true. This guy probably has no idea about the law of one, right? And here he is explaining these things in the conclusion of this show, how he was able to sort of surrender, let go, and in turn he feels that that is sort of what allowed his cancer to stop as well. Okay, so then I would like to sum up, because I'm just always like, there's a lot that you can always talk about with these types of things, but there was also this tarot card that I pulled out the other day. My friend Jim got me printed these nice Law of One tarot cards. They're just sort of the ones that are referenced in the books. So I was just looking over them, and it does bring up this one quote, which, I probably should have wrote it down, but it's something like, well, first of all, the tarot card is the transformation of mind, this sixth tarot card. And what it shows is there's like a being, and it kind of looks like a devil thingy, and it's like in the sun above two entities. One entity is on the right-hand path, one entity is on the left-hand path. On the right-hand path, it appears that the sun is just there. On the left-hand path, the sun is also there, but there's this sort of devil thing with an arrow shooting at the left-hand path. And the right-hand path also seems to be more clothed, whereas the left-hand path seems to sort of be a bit more transparent. They're not as clothed as well. So I was just reflecting on the symbolicness of this, and this one quote where they talk about how on the service to others path, so the right-hand path, the pitch is held high above of that person so that all catalyst is seen as light, meaning that if you know that everything is about lessons of love, then the darkest, most harsh catalyst can happen to you, but you understand that it is for a reason, it is for lessons of love. And within that, the pitch of light is held high above you so that all experience is interpreted as love and light. Whereas on the negative path, on the left-hand path, they have the same catalyst that comes their way, but they don't get to see it as love and light. They just get to see it as the quick and cruel catalyst that it is, which is true. It's terrible, bad things, but they have to control it. They have to control 98% of the catalyst that comes their way in order to graduate, versus the service to others path, and you'll technically only have to be 51% on the service to others orientation in order to graduate. They say that achieving both of those is equally as hard. However, I just wanted to kind of give you that symbolic example so that you can see what I'm talking about, how even though catalyst may be terrible, it might not be, fair even, it might be cruel as the words that Ra uses, it is still, if you interpret it through lessons of love and unity and light, it's there for a reason. You can accept it, you can work with it. There is sense to this universe, there is a bias towards love. So seek understanding and it will come your way. Attempt to accept things the best you can, and I think that's all you can really do, right? So once again, just want to reiterate, don't try to worry too much about, oh my gosh, I'm not accepting things, am I going to get sick? I don't suggest doing that. I suggest to take this all with a grain of salt. Use it just for the benefit of having the wider perception of, okay, maybe I am trying a little too hard to control right now. Maybe I should be working on acceptance. Okay, so if this all makes sense to you guys, Well, first of all, thank you for listening, but you can get all this information for free at my website, the1infinitecreator.com. There are links to all of the LL research material, which is who provides this to us for free, all the raw and quo material. Very much appreciate LL research and all their service to us. And yeah, if you like this, please like, share, subscribe, leave me a comment. I always appreciate reading the comments. I'm sorry if I don't have time to always respond to them all, but I definitely read them, take them into consideration, and, apply anything that I can think of in the next podcast. All right, so thank you so much for listening. Have a good rest of the week, you guys. Happy New Year. Love you.